Our next speaker I'd like to introduce is Dr. Rob Winwood. Dr. Winwood is the Scientific Communications Manager of DSM Nutritional Products. He's held a series of senior technical and business development positions in various global food ingredient companies, and he is currently the chair of the Scientific Committee of GOED, the committee which all of our speakers today are also members of. Just want to make that point. Dr. Winwood.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you. This will be another rocket review, I'm afraid. This time we're going to concentrate on the brain and the neurological system. I guess most of you know half of your brain is fat, and of that fat, somewhere between 10 and 15% of that is actually DHA. Now, in fact, the concentrations of DHA in the brain very much vary depending on which part of the brain that you're talking about. But having said that, there are two particular areas that we have very high concentrations. That is here in the frontal cortex and here in this seahorse-type structure called the hippocampus. And what's important is that those areas are really associated with very high-level cognitive functions. In other words, things relating to memory, executive memory, working memory, spatial learning, things like that. So in terms of function, DHA has a structural role. And we can see here some of the things that it does. So it modulates the function, for instance, of signal transduction molecules. It combines with specific G protein-coupled reactors like rhodopsin, and we can see that in the functioning of the visual cascade. And it also has various functional roles, and you've seen from what Atla presented a little bit earlier, some of the various metabolites that are produced. But also in terms of function, DHA helps with neuronal differentiation, with myelination, with synaptogenesis and apoptosis. Also, we believe it might help reduce the effects of some of the free radical damage that may exist in the frontal cortex cells of the brain. Now, this little representation you can see here in front of you is what happens if you have a little bit of neurous tissue in the laboratory and you add DHA, or you don't. And you can see, if we look at this, sorry, let me just put that back for you. This is what happens when we add the DHA, and you get a lighting up effect. You get the neurites flashing, the electrons between them, and you get that effect. That's basically the simple ways it allows the neurons to communicate between each other. What I like to try and show is, in neuroprotection points of view, there are three basic ways in which DHA works. First of all, it reduces inflammation. Secondly, reduce plaque aggregation, and that's particularly important in terms of the formation of amyloid plaques, the sort of thing that you see in Alzheimer's disease. And finally, in terms of blood flow, helps prevent the atherosclerotic plaques. And these are all important in terms of prevention of neurological disease. So, absolutely key, DHA is present in mother's breast milk. That's why you find it in infant formula. And during the gestation process, DHA is actually preferentially transferred from the placenta through to the developing fetus. Now, the European Union has recognized this, and in fact, it's allowed under the Article 14 claims this series of specific statements saying that DHA contributes to things like normal visual development, contributes to development of the eye. And these are things already in European law. And we can make this sort of summary of the various benefits that DHA can offer in terms of different stages of the life. So the things that it helps in terms of if you give the supplement in early pregnancy, in terms of what happens if you give it in infant formula. Key thing is you have a whole series of developmental particles which are going to be assisted by doing this. So we can see those papers up in front of you there. We actually are very lucky to have Professor Alex Richardson with us, and she's been conducting a trial called the DOLAB trial, and just wanted to show you this little bit of work, some of the preliminary results from the first paper that the DOLAB study released in Oxford. And here we are looking basically at a supplementation of 600 milligrams a day to children in the age range of 8 to 10 years. And what we're looking at here is what happens to the bottom 20% or 10% of reading ability in a classroom. And I'll just show you. You can see quite a significant difference in reading scores with the bottom 20%, but if we go down to the very worst readers, we can see a really big difference in terms of their reading abilities. So we're seeing bearing in mind, we're talking about children now aged 8 to 10, so DHA still has effect in terms of improving their reading ability at this age. And this study is ongoing, and we'll hopefully hear a little bit more about that later on. And if we go a little bit further to the older brain, this is some work which was done by Robert McNamara in Cincinnati University, and basically we have both levels of 400 or 1200 milligrams of DHA contributed. The key thing here is that the study was done with functional MRI, and you can see at the front of that image the red part of the brain showing this was the bit of the brain which was basically working when the supplementation was carried on. So we can see what's actually happening when we supplement DHA. Another little bit of interesting, there's a difference that seems to be between the sexes. It does seem to be that basically girls seem to need more DHA than boys, and I guess good reasons in terms of why that might be. So let's move on to adult health, and we do need DHA as we move into adult health. And in fact, the European Union again has facilitated this. It's produced a statement under its Article 13.1 health claim that DHA contributes to the maintenance of normal brain function. But that's assuming that you have 250 milligrams a day of specifically DHA. Now, if we look at, for instance, if we take a middle-age cohort, which was done in a study back by Muldoon et al., again, we can still see improvements in things like non-verbal reasoning, mental flexibility, and working memory with DHA, but there weren't any effects for ALA and EPA in that particular intervention study. And we can go through and look at some other work. If we look at the work of Stonehouse, for instance, again, we can see in that particular work that reaction times were improved, but in this case, they didn't actually see any difference in terms of the genetic phenotype, which is a little bit unusual, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Okay, so we've looked at the way in which DHA is important for the developing brain and in terms of normal maintenance in normal life, but could it be protective in terms of traumatic brain injury? And, we've spoken a lot about important diseases previously to this, but did you realize that if we take away communicable disease, that in fact traumatic brain injury is the major cause of death in those aged between 1 and 44 years on a global basis? So it's something we really need to try and get an idea of. And when you have a brain injury, there's an awful lot of really serious degradation, things that occur at the time. So what we're wondering is, can DHA and EPA provide the sort of neuroprotection, prevent neuroinflammation, and very much encourage nerve regeneration and restore neural circuits? And there is data out there that suggests it can do just that. We know, for instance, that DHA can increase both the number and the length of neurites in the embryonic hippocampal and cortical neuron cultures. Going back to what Atlas said a little bit earlier, there is a specific G-coupled protein receptor 40 present in the brain, the GPR40. And again, what we find here is that DHA and EPA will specifically bind to that receptor in preference to arachidonic acid. Again, stopping to the main effects of arachidonic acid and therefore decreasing the chance of inflammation, as we've already seen. Right, so what could possibly happen in terms of the aging process? Could we do something to prevent things? Well, there have been quite a few studies, some positive, some not so, but indicating that fish intake as a whole can help prevent cognitive decline in the elderly. So I've mentioned here things like the GOED and the CHAP studies. But unfortunately, there are some other studies, like the Boston study, that in fact didn't give such particular results and didn't show some improvement. So we don't have an absolute definition either way at the moment. However, if we look at a very recent meta-analysis conducted by Mazur in 2012, and here we see that in fact they did show in the meta-analysis that the DHA-EPA intervention improved the memory of of patients who are suffering some form of mild cognitive impairment. And that's actually been balanced again by a further study in Malaysia very recently. And in that particular study, they seem to believe that it was the high plasma lipid peroxide levels that occurs in those MCI patients that actually was the major cause, and that EPA and DHA attenuated those levels, and that was the reason why they believed this provided assistance. So there is some benefit there. Now, going back to that mild cognitive impairment, there was a study done by Yurko Mauro et al. Back in 2008. And in this case, 900 milligrams a day of algal-derived DHA was given to 465 participants over a 6-month level. Key point about this was done with a rather large set of cognitive test batteries, and what they found was that at the end of the study that the patients basically had their memory improved equivalent to 3 years. So if they were age 70, in fact, their memory ability went back to what they were at 67 years. So a 3-year improvement in memory, which again is quite a major improvement, and in fact also helped with their heart health at the same time. So that's a useful thing towards that. Now, you may have heard quite a bit about the possibilities of omega-3s and Alzheimer's disease, and let's just take a look. We're dealing with a really complicated disease here. Two main things. We actually look at the brain itself that's been affected by Alzheimer's disease. We will see two things. We will see neurofibrillar tangles actually within the neurites themselves, and then we will see amyloid plaques, which actually occur between the neurites and then again stop preventing the communication between those cells. And we know that brain DHA itself is definitely very highly dependent in terms of dietary intake. And we also know from population studies that high DHA dietary intake is associated with significantly lower risk of Alzheimer's disease. But then it gets a little bit more complicated, and not every age. For instance, we do know that long-time supplementation of DHA in rodents, that will reduce the amyloid beta formation that you can see on that slide. And just to complicate things further, DHA homeostasis is affected by age, and when you get very old, basically you'll start seeing the DHA levels naturally go up, so you need more and more to have an effect. So, the big question, does DHA influence Alzheimer's disease? Certainly it's been, now we have to say that to date, the 3 major intervention trials that have been done have not shown any conclusive results. But there may be a very good reason for this. The studies that have been done are basically too short. We now think that Alzheimer's disease probably starts some 25, 30 years before symptoms actually exist, and no trial's been done over that kind of period of time at all. The other thing is, if you look at the studies that have been done, if you look at some of the subgroup populations, then you do see some effects. If you look at whether the patient happens to present the polyprotein E4 allele or not, then you do start seeing to see something that helps. The ApoE4 negative group of people did seem to be affected from the onset of Alzheimer's disease in the stage with the DHA intervention. So there is some hope there, but we obviously need a lot more work there to show what might happen. So we have to say that the experimental studies have certainly been consistently positive in animals, but at the moment we still have to do a lot more work to see what actually happens in the human side. So that's a real run through very quickly, but thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate it. Thank you.